As Laura said, I'm Barbara Strauch, the Deputy Science Editor of the New York Times, and I've written a book called The Secret Life of the Grown-Up Brain, on what current research has recently discovered about that brain. And I'm happy to report, as she mentioned, that the book also has a subtitle, The Surprising Talents of the Middle-Aged Brain. I have to say that my work on the book didn't start out on such a cheerful note, however. I guess after more than 35 years as a journalist, what perks my interest is not that everything is just fine. After all, there is no story if there is no tornado. And my exploration of the grown-up brain began with what seemed to be going wrong, not right. I'd written a previous book, The Primal Teen, about the changes that take place in the adolescent brain. And often, when talking about that book, a teacher or a parent would ask me questions about what was happening with their own middle-aged brains. Almost always the questions came from worry. As we enter middle age, we begin to notice a few changes in our own brains that are not so welcome. We walk down the street and run into someone we've known for years and can't for the life of us remember their name. We know what they do, maybe even where they like to go on vacation, but the name is gone. Even on the job, a colleague we've worked with for years but haven't seen in a while shows up, but their name does not. It's embarrassing and it's scary. And it doesn't stop with names. We also get distracted. We walk out of one room and into another and forget why we're there. "Why didn't you get any milk?" I asked my husband one morning as I stared into the refrigerator. "It's right there," he said, pointing to the half-gallon on the counter. "You just put some on your cereal." Indeed, I had. But after busying myself with another complex activity, making tea, the image of the milk went right out of my brain. And as we all know, such stories are countless. As we move through middle age, we all make adjustments. We make lists, but we also worry. We worry about getting old. We worry about getting sick. But we really worry about losing our minds. Is forgetting a name or a distracted mind in middle age a sign that a slow but inevitable decline has begun? That our brain is no longer at the top of its game? Or, heaven forbid, is it the beginning of something much, much worse? As I began to think about this, however, I also realized that at work, at home, and with friends, I was surrounded by people who really knew what they were doing. These were people, also in the thick of middle age, who, despite not remembering the name of the restaurant they just ate in or the book they just read, were also structuring complex deals between financial companies on different continents and coming home to cook Coco Saint-Jacques. These were people who could simultaneously write an email to a daughter who was unhappy at college, sort expenses, and participate in a conference call with colleagues in Washington. These were people at age 57, under extreme stress, who could make all the right calls and land a jetliner in the Hudson, saving every life on board. The middle-aged brain is a contradiction. There certainly is some fraying going on. But at the same time, the grown-up brain seems to be more powerful than ever, and I was intrigued. But I'd like to start out here with where I started, with the worries that things seem to be happening in our brain as it moves through middle age, now defined somewhere between 40 to 68 years of age. The truth is, by midlife, a brain is no longer pristine. Most of our brains do get a little ragged around the edges, and names are often the first to go. Even names we know well vanish. We have a strong feeling we know the name, but we just can't bring it to mind. Who are you? It's annoying, it's frightening. In her research on such tip-of-the-tongue incidents, Deborah Burke, an expert in the field at Pomona College, found they start to creep in as young as 35 and are a big part of middle age. It happens more often with proper names than with the names of objects. In survey after survey, this tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon is listed as the most irritating, embarrassing, and worrisome part of the aging brain. So why does it happen? Well, the names, for beginnings, are not really gone, and it's not because we've tried to stuff too many into our brains. It's a matter of retrieval. Dr. Burke's research shows that it's because of the way names are stored and organized in our brain in the first place. The sound of the name and the meaning of a name are put in different areas of the brain, and the connection between them weakens. It can weaken if we don't use it, and we can also weaken with age, like that running muscle you haven't used much lately either. It happens most often with the names of people we know but have not seen recently. It happens too because the link between a person and his name is so arbitrary. Names that for some reason can be attached to a person are much less likely to be forgotten. I'll never forget the name of my childhood dentist, for instance, Dr. Smiley. We can forget a name, but often we don't forget a person's occupation. Why? Because an occupation will have a lot of different clues stored in many places all over the brain. A baker? It might be a hat, or the color white, or a knife, or a menu that will click and help us retrieve the memory of what that person does. But forgetting a name isn't something Dr. Burke is too worried about, and she doesn't think the rest of us should either. She uses the alphabet trick. Talking with that nameless person, she silently goes through the alphabet, letter by letter. You'll be surprised, she says, how often the name pops up when you hit the right letter. A similar sound can prompt that lost name to reappear out of nowhere. But the fraying mind doesn't end with a forgotten name. By middle age, if our brains are not misplacing names, they're often misplacing themselves. We get distracted. And it doesn't take much to knock us off course. A doorbell rings and we forget we're boiling water for potatoes. We meet a friend at the hardware store, and after a brief chat, we no longer remember we went there to get a rake. My friend Phyllis, 51, who runs her own consulting company, told me that she was climbing her building stairs to go to her office on the 4th floor not long ago, and she suddenly looked up and found herself on the 8th floor. As she climbed, she had glanced out the window to see who was in her parking spot, got distracted, and simply went right by her own office door. I've never done that before, she told me. Is that middle age? What is happening, scientists think, is that you can suddenly, as you age, fall into what's called the default mode. It's kind of a daydreaming mode, an inner dialogue that you enter more easily. The knowledge of this default daydreaming mode is new, and it's one of the most important discoveries about what happens in the brain after age 40. A lot of research is underway to figure out just how that happens. But other areas get a bit dodgy too. A friend, Michael, settled in on a plane ride to finish a book he'd started earlier in the week. But after he picked it up, he couldn't remember ever reading it at all. He told me, however, he was too proud to start over, so he just opened the book in the middle and began there. Recollection of recent events, books read, movies seen, breakfast eaten, can simply vanish. Everyone in middle age has their own stories of the glitches that occur, but in the end, that is not what surprised me the most about the middle-aged brain. For a long time, the outlook on the brain as it aged was not good. Scientists once believed that we lost as much as 30% of our brain cells as we got older. Even the most eminent neuroscientists thought that millions of our brain cells simply shriveled up and died as we aged. Our brains were considered in top form in our 20s, and indeed stopped developing then. And why should a lot be known about middle age anyway? In some ways, it's a recent phenomenon. For much of human history, lives were brutal and short. Just a century ago, the developed world had an average lifespan of 47 years. That didn't mean people didn't live longer, but the sheer number with a long expanse of time in the middle wasn't big enough to demand a lot of attention. And even when scientists began to pay more attention to what was happening in our newfound middle years, most of the attention was focused on other parts of our bodies, hairlines, hips, hearts, not brains. And that has changed. With new tools such as brain scanners, genetic analysis, and more sophisticated long-term studies, the middle-aged brain is finally getting its due. And I'm happy to say what's been found so far is not only surprising, it is profoundly important and encouraging.